An arrow struck a man in the shoulder. The man it struck was the Son of Heaven, the one ruler everyone under the sky answered to, the single person chosen by heaven to govern all people in its name. The man who loosed it was his own subject. In that age, for a subject to shoot the Son of Heaven was a crime the heavens could not forgive. Everyone held their breath and waited for the punishment to come down. It never came. The Son of Heaven clutched his shoulder, pulled his troops back, and the subject who had shot him went home and went on ruling his own land as though nothing had happened at all. This arrow was loosed inside a kingdom once called the most perfectly ordered in the world, the Zhou. A single vast web of rules had arranged all things under heaven so cleanly that it held for more than 200 years. Every person knew exactly where he stood and exactly to whom he bowed. So how does a kingdom this strictly ordered ever reach the day a subject puts an arrow in his king, and the king can do nothing? What did that one arrow pierce? To answer that, go back 300 years to one night. The old man in the prison cell, carving line after line into bamboo by the light of a single lamp, King Wen of Zhou. Into those lines he had written a law. The sun at its highest must begin to fall. The moon at its fullest begins to wane, and nothing stays at its peak. The night he wrote it, his own house was climbing toward exactly such a peak. Later, the Zhou destroyed the Shang and reached that peak in truth. They built that flawless web of order and bent all under heaven to it. But just as the book had foretold, the falling began the moment they arrived. And what pulled the Zhou down was hidden inside the very thing that had carried them up. After conquering the Shang, the Son of Heaven faced a hard problem. The land was too vast for one man in one city to govern. So he gave it away. As a man might cut apart one enormous field, he carved the realm into pieces and granted each piece to a follower or a kinsman who took his own people there and held that corner of the world in the king's name. The old man at Muye, the one who crushed the oracle bones underfoot and charged first into the storm, Jiang Zia. He was granted the land at the far eastern edge, against the sea, and that state was called Qi. The line of the king's own brother, the Duke of Zhou, held the heartland, where ritual and music ran richest, and that state was called Lu. Even the conquered remnants of the Shang were given ground to live on, somewhere to belong, and that state was called Song. Dozens, then hundreds of these granted states spread across the land like rings within rings. At the dead center of every circle sat a chair, the seat of the Son of Heaven. The center needed no great army and no full granary. It only had to sit there, and every ring would face it. At first, this was brilliant. With almost no force of his own, the king held an enormous land in his fist. But it hid a danger no one spoke aloud. The states he had given away would grow on their own. Bring your eye to the river that runs through all of this, the Yellow River. Nearly every story on this land happens along its banks. Follow it east to the sea, and there is Qi, where salt dries white in flats along the shore, and the nets come up heavy, prosperous against the coast. North over the mountains is Jin, ringed by peaks, its roads winding narrow through the passes, able to strike out or fall back behind high ground. South past the heartland, down to the Yangtze and the Han, is Chu, vast, sprawling, and spoken of by the lords of the central states with a faint contempt as the barbarians of the south. And at the far west, where the river bends, pressed against the tribes who still wandered and still made war, the wrong, there was one small state. Granted its land latest of all, set in the most remote corner, it lived mingled among those tribes. Its men rode and dressed half like the wrong, and watered their horses at the same streams. When the nobles of the heartland gathered, the name of that state seldom came up. It was called Qin. 200 years passed, and the granted states grew. They opened more fields and raised more soldiers, swallowed the smaller states beside them, and grew larger still. The chair at the center stayed the size it had always been. One side rose, the other did not. And there came a day when the largest of those rings had grown stronger than the center itself. That is where the arrow came from. The lord who loosed it was already far stronger than the royal house of Zhou. He fired it not because he had gone mad, but because he had reasoned out one thing for certain. The Son of Heaven could no longer punish him. And once every eye had seen the king take an arrow and do nothing, the last thread of who bows to whom came loose with it. That arrow had not pierced a shoulder. It had pierced ritual itself. The chair was still there, but everyone now knew that the man in it could command no one. The circle began to scatter. With the king's word unable to pass his own walls, the lords began to swallow and strike one another. Worse, the Wrong and Di to the north, and the powerful Chu to the south, saw a heartland with no head and pressed inward by inches. Small states were wiped out whole, rulers killed, ancestral temples leveled. 200 years of rings within rings lay scattered on the ground. The land needed someone to gather it back. The first man to do it was a prince who had once bitten through his own tongue and played dead to stay alive. It begins with a race for a throne. The old ruler of Qi had died, and 2 princes in exile raced home at once. Whoever arrived first would rule. One of them was named Xiaobai. On the other prince's side rode the most dangerous mind of the age, a strategist whose schemes men feared more than armies, and he meant to clear his master's rival from the road. He cut off Xiaobai's procession, drew his bow, and put an arrow into Xiaobai's belt and side. Xiaobai gave one grunt, fell from his chariot, and lay still. The archer was certain he had won. And why not? He was never wrong. He turned his horse and rode back to report, and his master, hearing it, eased his pace and travelled on without hurry. What the archer did not know was that the arrow had struck a bronze buckle on Xiaobai's belt. In the instant he fell, Xiaobai made the choice that saved his life. He bit down hard on his own tongue, let the blood run from his mouth, and played dead. With a mouthful of his own blood and a moment's stillness, a young prince had just deceived the cleverest man alive. Once the archer was gone, Xiaobai rose, drove his horses through day and night, reached Qi ahead of his rival, and took the throne. He was now Duke Huan of Qi, and the strategist who had loosed that arrow on the road was named Guan Zhong. By every expectation, Guan Zhong was a dead man. He had put an arrow in the new ruler. He was Duke Huan's mortal enemy. He was bound hand and foot and brought before the Duke to be killed. Instead, Duke Huan did something almost no ruler in history has done. With his own hands, He untied the bindings of the most dangerous man in the realm, the one mind that had already proven it could kill him, named him chief minister, and put the whole of Qi into the hands that had loosed an arrow at his heart. Many rulers have spared an enemy. Almost none have handed him the kingdom. To take the man who tried to kill you and set your whole state in his hands was something near unheard of. Duke Huan was not after revenge. He was after getting it done, and to gather a scattered world back together. What he needed was the cleverest mind of the age, even the one that had once wanted him dead. Guan Zhong took up Qi, and what he did was not to draw battle lines. He counted the mountains and seas of Qi, the salt along the coast, to be sold inland where there was none, the iron in the ground, to be cast into farm tools or into weapons. He ordered the scattered villages anew, so that those who farmed gave farming their whole attention, and those who fought were soldiers across generations, each at his own work in peace, and at one command, in war, a whole nation under arms. Within a few years, the granaries were full, the treasuries full, the army forged. Duke Huan asked him, "Now can I command all under heaven?" "Not yet," Guan Zhong said. "The realm will not bow, because your soldiers are many. It bows to one thing only." That thing was the chair at the center, the Son of Heaven. The king had long since lost his power, but his name still held, and a name, Guan Zhong understood, was a weapon in itself. The method came down to 4 words: honor the king, expel the barbarians. Here was the quiet genius of it. The king could no longer command, but he could still bless. And whatever he blessed, no rival could oppose without becoming a traitor to all under heaven. So Duke Huan did not push the powerless king aside. He lifted him up and held him out in front, a shield no enemy dared strike through. Every march Duke Huan made was now the king's march. Every lord he humbled had defied not Qi, but heaven itself. He had turned a king who ruled nothing into the one name that made his own sword lawful. By the gathering at Qi, nearly every lord whose name was still worth speaking had come. They smeared their lips with blood, swore an oath, and named Duke Huan Lord of the Covenant. The words of the oath honored the king of Zhou. Every man at the table knew whom the table truly obeyed. The Son of Heaven even sent a gift of meat from his own altar to honor this Lord of the Covenant. And in that moment, the ruler all men answered to had become the one who vouched for the power of another. This is the master switch of the whole age. The Son of Heaven was still there, but his word no longer ruled. Order no longer came down from the sky. It had fallen to the ground, to the question of whose fist was hardest, and whether that fist would drape itself in the king's old robe. The mandate had not been seized. It had been borrowed. Duke Huan borrowed it earliest, and borrowed it best, and became the first man ever to do so. The first hegemon. Duke Huan held the seat of the hegemon for many years. Then Guan Zhong grew old and fell ill, and on his deathbed he held the duke's hand, and named them one by one. Certain men, my lord, you must never employ, for they keep to your side for your power, and not for you. After Guan Zhong's last breath, the duke remembered for a while. But the days wore on, and the named men drifted back to his side one by one. The hand that had been forgiven and entrusted with all of Qi was gone, and his sons had long been sharpening themselves in the dark against one another for that chair. Duke Huan grew old and took to his sickbed. And in that moment, the men he had failed to keep away showed their true faces. They sealed the palace gates, raised a wall across the doorway, and cut off all food and all word from outside. The hegemon, who had commanded all under heaven, was shut inside his own palace, where no one came and no one left. Once at Qi, every lord worth naming had bowed to this man, and the Son of Heaven himself had sent meat from his own altar to honor him. Now the man who had 9 times gathered the lords lay alone behind a wall, listening to his son's soldiers fight in the courtyards for the right to inherit him before he had even died. No servant came. No meat came. The hegemon, who had once fed a covenant of kings, starved in the dark, slowly, in the palace that was now his tomb. After he died, still no one came. The sons were at war over the chair, and a father's body was no one's concern. He lay on that bed for 67 days through the turning of 2 full seasons, while the hall sank into silence around him, until the decay had spread so far that the maggots bred in him crawled out from under the door, over the threshold, and onto the bare stone of the empty court. Only then, from that sight upon the stone, did the living startle to a truth they had not dared to speak, that the Lord above all lords had been dead a long, long time. The new flagpole, only just raised, had fallen again. The banner lay once more on the ground, and the heartland turned to look around itself and ask, who will take it up now? Far away, a prince had already been wandering in exile, on foreign soil, for 19 full years. In rags, living on the mercy of others, driven off and mocked and weighed up again by one ruler after another. No one would have guessed that this cornered, worn-out wanderer would be the one to bend down and lift the fallen banner. That is the next story.